Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses as we begin with Part 1, from Symbolism of the Three Degrees by Oliver Day Street, Part 2, The Fellow Craft Degree. Symbolism of the Three Degrees by Oliver Day Street, Part 2, The Fellow Craft Degree. Symbolism of the Three Degrees, the Fellow Craft Degree. The ceremonies of initiation, passing and raising, as well as the lectures explanatory of them, are necessarily brief. Want of time and the danger of overburdening the candidate require that they should be so. The Mason, therefore, who relies solely upon what he sees and hears in the lodge, will obtain a very inadequate conception of Freemasonry. He may and doubtless will be more or less affected by our ceremonies. It could scarcely be otherwise, so solemn and impressive are they, but he will fail to discover and understand some of the greater truths which lie hidden beneath the surface and can never become, truly speaking, a bright Mason. Nearly every Masonic symbol or ceremony, like all true allegories, has two, sometimes more significations, one literal, the other symbolical. The literal meaning, usually the more apparent, is often of great interest, frequently affording striking evidences as to the origin and antiquity of Freemasonry. But it is the symbolical or allegorical meaning, usually the more recondite, which appeals most to the thoughtful mind. Nor is it unfortunate that the more important lessons are somewhat veiled from observation. We do not prize what we obtain easily. It is that for which we have striven or paid a big price which we value. If, therefore, from beneath the surface of these familiar ceremonies, any of us, by our own studies and reflections, are enabled to discover and bring to light truth, which have lain somewhat hidden, the appreciation of them is keener and the impression produced deeper and more lasting than if they had been open to superficial observation. For this reason, many of the greatest lessons of Freemasonry are wisely hidden away as prizes for the studious and the diligent only. The mysteries and the secrets of Freemasonry are not synonymous terms. The mysteries continue such forever, even to the Mason who will not study and read. Do you feel that Masonry is an idle and frivolous thing, unworthy of the attention of serious men? If so, did you ever reflect whether the fault was yours or that of the institution? Unless you are sure that you know what Freemasonry is, and what it teaches, and what are its designs, and that you thoroughly understand its methods of teaching, withhold your condemnation till you have made it the subject of a little serious study, because, as observed by an eminent authority, the character of the institution is elevated in everyone's opinion just in proportion to the amount of knowledge that he has acquired of its symbolism, philosophy, and history. Freemasonry is a many-sided subject. There is something in it which arrests and appeals to the shallowest mind or the most frivolous moral character. At the same time, there is much in it which has chained the thought and attention of the world's greatest intellects and wisest philosophers. It presents many aspects for study and investigation, either of which will amply repay the efforts of the intelligent mind, and will lead to knowledge not merely curious, as some suppose, but of the utmost practical value. We are forced to refer again to one line of thought touched on in the preceding chapter, because we regard it as fundamental to the study and understanding of any part of Freemasonry. This idea is that Freemasonry is an elaborate allegory of human life, both individually and collectively in all its varied aspects, past, present, and future. That the lodge represents the world into which mortal man is introduced, lives, moves, has his being, and eventually dies. That it also represents the place or state of the redeemed in the life which we believe follows this. That the lodge member typifies the individual man. That its organized membership represents mankind united into human society. That the ideal lodge member, ruled by love, wisdom, strength, and beauty, typifies man raised from a state of imperfection to one of perfection. Of all the ceremonies of the lodge, the fellow craft degree, when viewed by itself, is the most difficult and the least generally understood. Preston, who wrote the first monitor, tells us that such is the latitude of this degree that the most judicious may fail in an attempt to explain it. In Akin's Georgia Manual, we read that the splendid beauty of the fellow craft degree can be seen only by the studious eye, and that the master who would impress it upon the candidate must store his mind with the history, traditions, and ritualism of this degree. A flood of light, however, is at once shed upon the subject when we consider it a part of a human allegory, of which the entered apprentice and master's degrees are respectively the beginning and the completion. Let us then briefly consider it in this manner and endeavor to reach a clearer understanding of its meaning. That we may the better perceive just where it falls into the complete scheme, it will be necessary first to consider for a moment the entered apprentice and master's degrees. We are told in the master's lecture that the entered apprentice represents youth, the fellow craft, manhood, and the master mason, old age. A little study will serve to show us how completely this simile is justified. The introduction or first admission of the entered apprentice candidate into the lodge, therefore, typifies the entrance of man upon the world's stage of action, or in other words, the birth of the child into this life. The distinguished Masonic scholar, Dr. Mackey, says that the entered apprentice is a child in Masonry, and we read in many monitors that the first or entered apprentice degree is intended symbolically to represent the entrance of man into the world in which he is afterwards to become a living and thinking actor. In English working, the candidate is reminded that his admission into the entered apprentice lodge in a state of helpless ignorance was an emblematical representation of the entrance of all men on this their mortal existence. The preparation of the candidate and the plight in which he is admitted and entered apprentice strikingly symbolizes the helpless, destitute, blind, and ignorant condition of the newly born babe. Yes, it is even certain that there are features preserved in Masonic symbolism which allude to that part of life preceding even birth, and which hint at the phenomena of coition, generation, conception, and gestation of the child in its mother's womb. These things, rightly considered, are as much a part and as pure and holy a part of a human life as birth or death, and could no more be omitted from any complete representation of it. Let no one, therefore, imagine that he has found anything impure in Freemasonry because he has discovered in it symbols and ceremonies which once undoubtedly bore phallic significations. We may therefore say that the Masonic system epitomizes allegorically the life of man from the moment he is begotten through every stage of existence: conception, gestation, birth, infancy, childhood, youth, manhood, old age, death, the resurrection and everlasting life. Did any greater theme ever engage the attention of any society? Anything that pertains to any of these great subjects, and which tends to strengthen, to elevate, or to ennoble the human being and his character, is properly a part of Freemasonry. The first important lesson impressed upon the candidate after his entrance into the lodge is intended to signify to us that the very first idea that ought to be instilled into the mind of the child is a reverence and adoration for the deity, the great and incomprehensible author of its existence. From beginning to the end, the entered apprentice degree is a series of moral lessons. This is a hint so broad that one need not be wise in order to understand that the moral training and education of the child should precede even the development and cultivation of its intellect. How many parents and teachers fail just at this point? They polish and adorn the minds of their children and pupils with great diligence, at the same time neglect their moral training, and when too late, find that often they have made of them smart criminals. The placing of the young entered apprentice in the northeast corner of the lodge, in imitation of the ancient custom of laying the cornerstone of a building in the northeast corner, signifies that as an entered apprentice, he has but laid the foundation whereon to build his future moral edifice, that of life and character. It aptly and beautifully symbolizes the end of the preparatory period and the beginning of the constructive period of human life. The admonition there given him is to the effect that, having laid the foundation true, he should take care that the superstructure is reared in like manner. In other words, that his life, his moral temple, be kept in harmony with the moral precepts which have been given him in the entered apprentice degree. This likening of the human body to a temple of God is an ancient metaphor. Jesus' employment of it in speaking of his own body was but in keeping with a common practice among Jewish writers and teachers of his time. It immensely dignifies the physical body of man and teaches that when kept clean, both in the literal and the moral sense, it is a fit place for even deity himself to dwell. This body, so powerfully and yet so delicately contrived that often apparently slight causes produce death, we have no right to defile or abuse with any kind of excess. No mechanism was ever so delicately adjusted, and no careful engineer would ever think of putting even too much oil upon a fine piece of machinery. Yet excessive indulgence in food, drink, or other appetites works far greater injury to our bodies. The lesson is that we have no more right to defile or abuse our bodies than had the Jew to defile the temple or God upon Mount Moriah. In the third degree, the matters pressed upon our attention are the closing years of life, death, and the vast hereafter. The 12th chapter of Ecclesiastes, the most beautiful and affecting description of old age in all literature, is introduced. We're also told, and that the event at it celebrates occurred just before the completion of the temple, which is but a figurative way of saying that the period of life symbolized by the master's degree is that just preceding its close, just before the completion of the moral and spiritual temple. It is therefore with the greatest propriety that the master's degree is said to represent old age. If then the entered apprentice represents childhood and youth, and the master mason old ages, the fellow craft degree should, in order to complete the allegory, represent middle life and its labors. And this is precisely what it does with the greatest beauty and consistency. Although the candidate for the fellow craft degree is to be regarded as a seeker after knowledge, yet the first section of this degree consists chiefly of a reiteration of the moral teachings of the first degree. This is to remind the young man, as he is about to enter upon the serious labors and struggles of life, that virtue is to be always the first consideration, that no knowledge, no success which is purchased at the sacrifice of morals, honor, or integrity is to be prized. This lesson is repeated more than once in the course of this degree, admonishing us that no matter how engrossed in the affairs of life we may become, we should never suffer the allurements of coveted gains to seduce us from the pathway of strict rectitude and justice. Although thus reiterating and emphasizing the moral precepts of the first degree, the fellow craft degree is as distinctly intellectual in its purpose and spirit as the entered apprentice is moral. The great theme of the second degree is the attainment of knowledge, the cultivation of the mind, and the acquisition of habits of industry. This feature becomes prominent in the second section of this degree. Preston, who, as already observed, wrote what might be termed the first monitor, says that while the first degree is intended to enforce the duties of morality, the second comprehends a more diffusive system of knowledge. We read in Simon's monitor that the entered apprentice is to emerge from the darkness to light, the fellow craft is to come out of ignorance into knowledge. Dr. Mackey expresses it thus: the lessons of the entered apprentice are simply intended to cleanse the heart and prepare the recipient for that mental illumination which is to be given in the succeeding degree. And further, he says, the candidate in the second degree represents a man starting forth on the journey of life with the great task before him of self-improvement, and that the result is to be the development of all his intellectual faculties and the acquisition of truth and knowledge. In England, emulation working, the candidate is informed that while in the entered apprentice degree he made himself acquainted with the principles of moral truth and virtue, he is in the fellow craft degree permitted to extend his researches into the hidden mysteries of nature and science, and that he is led in the second degree to contemplate the intellectual faculty and to trace it from its development through the paths of heavenly science, even to the throne of God himself. Brother J.W. Horsley, rector of St. Peter's Cathedral, London, thus expresses the idea. Generally, therefore, we may say that the third degree represents and enforces the blessedness of spiritual life and the duty of progress therein, as the second degree performs the same office for the intellectual life and the first for the moral life. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment, and if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.